Good morning, somewhere. This is Dr. JJ in the driver's seat for another edition of our show. Welcome. First timers need not admit to a problem. Just listen and we'll try to inform and maybe entertain. We're talking to Hunter. What's on your mind today, Hunter?
Dr. JJ, good to be talking with you, man. Thank you. Good to be
Always
back.
good, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to begin with uh, get your take. I'm having some difficulty around a concept I've been hearing in these rooms,
Hmm.
um, uh, and I need you to break something down for me. This concept is living life on life's terms. What the hell does that really mean, Dr. JJ? I need your help with this
Well,
because
okay. No, that's fine. As usual, and this happens with any text. This happens with any um, uh, source of knowledge or truths. Things can be taken out of context. So I think it's important to remember the context in which the statement is being said. Okay, living life on life's terms has to do with the addiction community because in the past, and I as an addict can relate to this. I did not live life on life's terms, meaning that when I had problems that I thought I couldn't deal with, I would resort to my addiction, my so-called medication, that which was soothing, that which helped me get through something in theory, when in fact it did absolutely nothing and oftentimes compounded the problem. I wasn't living life on life's terms, and when I was even trying to kick the addiction, to stop what it was that I was dealing with on my own, I couldn't do it because I was delusional. I was thinking I could do it, and I kept falling back into it, falling back into it. So that that delusion of my ability to take care of things myself, I wasn't living life on life's terms, which means I needed help and I wasn't willing to ask until I finally asked, until I found out there was another way of doing it, and with the help of others, and as we talk about in the groups, power greater than myself, I could start to gain some manageability back into my life, which had become totally unmanageable. I'd blown it up. So, living life on life's terms is in that context of the unmanageability wrought by our addictive behaviors, if you will, and coming to accept that a I can't do it myself. B, there is a solution, and C, oh my God, they're in these books. That's the short form. Does
okay.
that help any?
Yes, that's very helpful in terms of
I mean, that's a start,
yeah.
but it implies a certain acceptance of reality is what reality is. Sometimes that's very bad. Okay, sometimes it's very good, but it's an acceptance of reality which, as addicts, as an addict, I had avoided before. So I need to have a level of acceptance. Doesn't mean I have to wish it to remain the way it is. On the contrary, no. It's only by acknowledging what is that I get a chance to actually change it. If I cannot recognize reality for what it is, I'm living in a fantasy land, and I'm thinking it's different from what it actually is. That doesn't mean I don't want it to be better. That doesn't mean I don't have aspirations or visions or a mission to change it and improve it. In fact, do as we've talked about of moving from amends to advocacy, because in the amends, we learn to live with others on the terms that are present at the time. But we don't stop there. In service, later in the steps, in service, we move from amends to advocacy because we know it can be.
It it I kept hearing I kept hearing it and unlike the way you explain it, when I hear it, it usually sounds somewhat like capitulation and and
right?
and 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 uh, and uh, kind of going along to get along with the status quo of
And
something.
it
And
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 it's
and
and it can given once again context. Oftentimes, it's said by someone who's still living in the victim mentality as a statement of resignation.
right, okay,
But once again, what's the context? The context is not someone who is active in their recovery. They're active in their victimhood. Okay. They're stuck. Okay. If, at best, they're going in circles. At worst, they're just sitting still. They're not even standing. They're just sitting still. So, once again, if we can break those rackets, if we can get out of where we sit and get into a different frame of mind, it can occur to us differently. We can recognize the reality, both the good and the bad, that exists. That doesn't mean it has to stay that way because being active in recovery means that we can move on to service to change the reality that actually is at this point.
if we can turn this up a notch, staying here, but kind of come. Um, I've been wrestling lately with the question of um, does life imitate art? Does art imitate life? And my reason in terms of connecting that, it's not a philosophical question,
That's
connecting
right.
that to what we're just talking about.
Mhm.
And you and I have been are both familiar with a work called the Story Wars,
Yes.
and the extent to which we live today in a world where our understanding of our being is actually taken from art, or say in terms of entities like, for example, Disney, create a reality, and
Mhm.
we kind of mimic the reality of what art has told us life is, and we're living in this. Does that and as a does that make sense? I'm again that's I'm staying
No,
with
no,
kind of
I,
what
I,
you
I
see the
think,
connection between what that and what we're
yes.
talking about. Okay,
No,
good.
I understand, and I think it speaks to us in terms of our spiritual and intellectual development. If the best we can do is imitate that which we see others present as reality, then we're missing a lot of tools in our toolkit to define what our reality really is, I think. Meaning, if I have a lot at and this starts early in life with my grandsons, 5 and 3 years old, and they're being prepared to look critically at different parts of the world, to accept different parts of the world, to get some idea of what is has some permanence as opposed to no permanence. All these different aspects of reality that that they are getting a chance with their parents' help and with the help of teachers and others in their environment to learn about early on. Well, we all get to continue to do that if we choose to later in life, so that as we pick up on what are the cultural norms and does that make any sense to me or not, we begin to establish our own worldview. Weltanschauung was the original term, from which we get to evaluate what is going to make sense for me living in this culture at this time. But if we don't even have those tools, or if those we've been told those tools aren't valid for whatever reason, there's plenty of denial built into education systems. I won't even go there. But it it happens that we are disarmed from our ability to evaluate what we're receiving, to the point where we enter adulthood oftentimes denuded of our intellectual capabilities because we've been told they're all invalid. When that happens, it's like, well, somebody come along and tell me what's real. And when you have some powerful cultural forces that say, well, this is pretty real, try this. We have a lot of people signing on to it. That's my short
yeah,
point.
yeah. Let's take it. I want to bring into this conversation a prior conversation we've had, and the concern I want to raise here, and this prior conversation had to do with story and our stories. Okay,
Yes, sir.
and to some context or point of reference. And so we had a prior conversation about our stories and our if you will our marketable franchise properties of our stories. And what occurs to me as we're having this conversation, and we've kind of touched on this before, the extent to which today individuals can be, and I would say many instances are, enslaved not in physical bondage, but by the stories they tell or don't tell, and are nonetheless just as enslaved by the narratives that they bought into and are perpetuated. And so when I ask that question about does life imitate art, does art imitate life? It would seem as though it's the former. Life imitates art, and the stories and narratives that are produced at whatever, and that's part of what you were just saying in terms of the Weltanschauung and how this works. People are and denuded of the tools. We can't get outside of the
right. We cannot step out of that story if we do not have the tools with which to ask the question.
Right.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And may I suggest that we're not stripped of all of our tools, and we get many opportunities to relearn tools we may have dropped or forgotten about. It's not a done deal that life has to imitate art. I consider that a version of intellectual slavery. Life to imitate art. I believe art imitates life, but the art that exists is bought into uncritically by those who do not have the tools or the inclination to question what's behind the art. They can't change the story. It's the default story. That's when life is imitating art because they don't know how to even consider the art.
So stay right here.
Okay.
And you made in your prior statement, you made a reference to spirituality. So on this point, there seems to be a consistency between the work in these rooms, the work around the steps, work on the steps, and religion, particularly Christianity. In this regard, it seems to me that both have a heavy emphasis on identifying character defects, and both are short on empowering to step into our story, into or out, however you want to say it. But the point is to step into to deal with the world of the story of in which we exist, and how to navigate the story, and if you reframe, recast the story, short on tools in that area. But other than you got these defects, you need to get that shit cleaned up. But the actual tools of does that make sense? Is that a
I can see how you can come to this conclusion. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, recall that when I am in these rooms, not only am I there for a purpose, but I am a work in progress.
Mhm.
So what I hear, what I say, and what others say, and what I hear in these rooms is not necessarily a full representation of the ideals behind the 12 steps, because we're all works in progress. You know, trying to get home any way we can, as there's a song to that effect. if if it and I don't even remember the artist, young lady, if God were one of us. Anyway, that'll come to me, and I'll call you up at 2 in the morning when I figure it out. But meanwhile, back here, it's important to recognize that there are very specific elements where we are required in the steps to acknowledge not just the so-called defects, the liabilities, the damage. We're called upon to focus on the assets. Okay, a a fearless and thorough moral inventory requires not just, Bill W. is very clear, not just the liabilities. You have to list out. You are by the steps required to, but based on your sponsor's suggestion, suggested to list out and consider the assets. Because subsequent to that, as you and I have worked on, those defects get flipped. Those defects really are either overused or the other side of actual character gold, character assets, character strengths, superpowers. That doesn't come through as we're focusing on the hard work and being works in progress in these rooms. Okay, but that's very much it. Just it, and of course, I think that maybe Father Esteban or somebody else can speak to the other aspects of Christianity that might parallel what the steps does in terms of looking at a more balanced picture of ourselves that comes through. But I suggest, at least from the point of view of the steps, that there may be more balance than you're hearing.
I'm not sure about balance, but I agree with you, because I want you, Mr. saying, I think there's potential.
Yes,
I think there's potential. I'm not sure about balance. I think there's much.
This is I will lead sessions on steps 6 and 7 at retreats to focus on that balance, to focus on that reframing, to focus on, wait a minute, okay, take away this, but what am I left with? A lot of the conversation in Drop the Rock is, well, what am I left with? And that's one of the little books from AA, based on a session that was given years and years ago at a convention. But very, very handy little item where, again, what we really have is not the burden of a defect, but the opportunity to see what was really there all along, and to begin to step into our new story. And we don't focus on it that much in these rooms. Your point. I understand.
But again, but I see the potential. I'm coming. I see the
I
potential.
understand your observation.
Yeah, I see the potential. I was coming back to, however,
Yes.
with an understanding the potential that does exist, but again, back to life imitating art. But we're so caught up that we can't, we don't seem to be able to step outside or step deeper into how we're, further out, deep down, whatever, to find
whichever metaphor you want.
Yeah, exactly. To find, so we're and that's why I was, I was saying, is it not the case? Because we do, going back to what you're saying, where we seem denuded, we seem to be and caught inside, of I mean,
Well, let me suggest this. This is why it's dangerous to do the steps with Dr. JJ, because Dr. JJ will take you there.
Okay. Yeah.
And I know other sponsors can and do, but many sponsors don't.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it really, we have to do our own work, of course, and this is how it occurs to me.
Mhm.
I had to get to this point to be able to even begin to reach a balance. And some, I know people who've been sponsoring for 25, 30 years who do not have this approach. And I mean, that's, they are where they are. That's why we all get to vote in this country, right?
Yes. Staying there.
Yes, sir.
So your answer to the question is you don't see, it's not your experience that it's life imitating art. It's art imitating life.
Careful. I see many people who live life attempting to imitate art.
Okay.
Because, I see many people for whom that statement is accurate. I'm not saying that's not the case.
Okay.
I suggest we've got things backwards when we do that.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
How's that?
Got it.
Okay. So yes, I'll make value statements. I do have certain values, as you know, and this is one of them.
Were you there when you were in your diction? Were you there?
Yes.
That right? Okay.
That's yes.
That
and I would have been indignant if you had suggested that at the time, and that's how delusional I was. Okay. But absolutely. No. That speaks to the fantasy and the bubble and what I was attempting to imitate. I mean, and the illusions that I created for myself. Absolutely. I was attempting to imitate what I had seen as art somewhere else. Good, bad, or indifferent. But absolutely. I totally agree with that. And maybe that's why I'm so poignant's not the word. I'm so insistent on this point, is because it's still a sensitive subject for me. Because you're right. It is a struggle to shift out of that and be able to have my art imitate my life and not the other way around.
The struggle continues. Would you, what would your response be to getting to where you are without coming to deal with our characters? Is that part of getting to where you are? Is some understanding of,
Yes.
Dr. JJ, this work, we shared. You know, it occurs to me that it's not accidental given who you are, where you are, your journey, and 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 who I am, where I'm my journey, that we share some understanding that um you know it that ground have been broken. There's some common ground
Yes,
that to build upon. That we're you someplace else, and I'm so, you know, we may not be here, you know, because we couldn't,
that's
you know,
right.
how can we get here without,
It,
you know, that there was something common that
that got
preceded
us
that
both
he
that
got to get
earned
right.
you
But
this seat and earned you that seat.
right, right.
That's right.
But I'm specifically with that also talking about some intuitive or something of around the discussion on characters that 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 didn't that wasn't a hard sell. It wasn't something we had to be, you know what I'm saying? But
No,
somehow in our
no. You were prepared for it in certain ways, and I was prepared for it in
okay,
certain
okay,
ways, and
okay,
so we kind of fell into it together.
okay, right, right.
You will.
Yeah,
I know.
right, right.
I know something of my preparation, um, and just a bit or two of yours. So yes, no, I had been prepared for this with some of the personal work I had done uh, years before you and I met.
But
So
maybe,
when we,
some of that work of buying those Mercedes for others. You know what I mean?
yeah, they were BMWs.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
You know, when I go for psychotherapeutic services, I look for cool guys,
Okay,
okay,
okay, all
and I make
right.
sure that with my money I'm paying them, it's good money, that they're buying BMW. Please understand,
I
okay?
stand corrected.
I only
Forgive me.
bought two, only bought two that I know of so far.
Okay, all right.
But hey, I'm young, and there's more to spend on psychotherapeutic service. Certainly, no, that was even, but even before that, and separate from that, my work, brief as it was, in Native American cultures,
Hmm,
in other spiritual practices, coming to reflect upon. I do believe there are. I may not hold with all the tenets of a variety of spiritual practices. I'm personally, I'm not a Unitarian. Others are, and that's fine. But I do believe there are truths, very profound truths that can be found in these different forms of practice. Humankind has been searching for eternal truths for a long, long time. And so in that has been part of my investigation, and I've come
hmm,
across some of these truths in that process.
hmm,
Okay.
hmm,
And certainly the Native American spirituality
hmm,
speaks to elements of our character.
hmm,
And it's easy then to suggest that not only are they elements of my character, they're characters in and of their own right.
hmm,
Okay. And so that was kind of the conceptual leap for me, for example, because because the truth of what was being described to me as the elements of my character struck home with me, made sense to me, and provided me a context in which to consider parts of myself, both what worked and what didn't, and and how I could come to where I'd come to. So all this was part of my personal development that led me to where this suggestion that I have a variety of characters playing different roles in my life makes sense.
hmm. I wouldn't want us to close out this conversation in an hour without touching on something I want to get your response to. Um, so, in terms of with what you just said and taking a step further, um, again, I recognize the potential and the steps and the store stepping into out of our stories. Um, I you've explained to me about the point around terminal uniqueness. Is that yeah?
Yes, sir.
Um,
That's the term.
and 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 I hear individuals uh, who various places in terms of the work um, speak of not being the person they were before they came in the room.
Mm.
Not that person anymore.
I hear that.
And yeah, um, and and this selfish, uh, self-centered, all
Mhm.
these things that character defects around being
Well,
selfish,
what
self-centered. Yeah, right,
they've described as
right,
pejorative
right, exactly, right,
of
right, right.
them. Yeah.
But here's the thing with that. But all of this is still I.
Really? Really?
Never getting to terms of character to be able to speak in terms of third person
Mm.
and to see them, but I find it interesting. But you're still about I. Yeah, everything is still but somehow you
We
say
need to. Do you, do you remember an old politician by the name of Bob Dole?
yeah, okay.
Remember, Bob Dole was speaking in the third person about Bob Dole and how he was held up to some degree of ridicule. He was the presidential
All right,
nominee of the
all right.
party decades ago, but Bob Dole would talk about Bob Dole as in the third person. You know, and he made some of this explicit. It's like, but wait a minute, Bob Dole actually knew something, which there was once again a grain of truth. Often is a grain of truth in what a lot of people say. It's just a matter of finding it
Yeah,
amongst
right,
all the
right,
other
right,
stuff.
right, right.
But indeed, that requires an ability to have perspective. To your point, it's just maybe that's a silly example, but I think
No. Yeah,
you
but it's
understand.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean but I like what you said. But that does require some kind of perspective. I mean it
Yes,
right.
yes, and as works in progress, oftentimes we don't have that perspective yet.
Yeah. But I like I said
There's more to
I
come.
but I'm just amazed. I'm not that person. I'm not. I'm not.
Uh huh. Uh
But
huh.
but
Well,
but
no,
then what?
I come
But the
back
common
after and I
denominator
say,
is
I am that person.
right.
Without that person, I'm not here.
Here.
Without that person, I don't belong in this room. But that person got me right here. Praise God.
I'm
Without
like,
that person, I don't get to learn.
yeah, yeah,
For example. No,
yeah,
but
yeah. I guess I
you
just
and I
find
have
it
talked
interesting.
about this before.
Yeah,
And indeed, it's no, we may have an unusual perspective compared to some of these people in
yeah,
these rooms.
yeah,
At the same time, I I think there's just more work.
yeah. I'm like, to the contrary. I'm like Daffy. I resemble that remark.
Amen, brother. I get it.
Yeah,
And it's yeah, no, it's part and parcel with my conversations. That my faults are my faults. That I have, in recognizing the value of my faults, it's also important for me to recognize the collateral damage created by my faults too. I don't want to discount that I have damaged others because of my insensitivity, my selfishness, my greed, my lust, other things have caused others problems. So it's incumbent upon me to acknowledge that part too, but acknowledge that these things are part of what make me me. And with God's help, the so-called defects are actually assets in disguise.
amen, brother. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Good
Hunter.
stuff. Look, thank you. If I can just get a plug in here, want the audience, if you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. JJ and Hunter, We invite you to go over to movetheworld.us and check us out and see what's going on over there in terms of doing some business with us. Again, movingtheworld.us. And it's soon to come on Rect America. You'll be able to also find some subscription merchandising going on there. So check that out too. So anyway, Dr. JD, another wonderful conversation, and enjoy being with you. And
Always enjoy, Hunter.
Turn it back over to you.
Well, we're done, dude. No, we're good. We have some interesting things to cover in the future, but I do hope folks are willing to tune back in as we move forward. But for today, Dr. JJ is going to take off his robe and get back to taking care of the lawn.
There you go, Ron. All right. You be well, man.
Living life on life's terms.
That's what it means. Go get that lawn, bro. All right.
Thank you, Hunter.
All right. Thank you, Dr. JJ.
Okay.
Next time. Bye-bye.
Next time.